The hum of wealth was quieter than expected. In the first-class lounge of Charles de Gaulle's Gate 14, everything seemed coated in velvet silence. The clicking of designer shoes, the muted clink of porcelain cups, the low murmur of conversations conducted in French, English, and the occasional German. Here, status wasn't announced, it was assumed. And so, when Keanu Reeves walked in, boots worn, coat frayed at the cuffs, and a faded leather satchel slung over one shoulder, the assumption snapped. He didn't match the palettes, not the polished chrome nor the champagne-toned upholstery. His presence made the room flicker, just slightly, like static disrupting a high-definition signal. The receptionist had hesitated. She scanned his ticket once, then again. Her smile didn't falter, but it sharpened around the edges. "Bien, Monsieur de Laimont, bien, Monsieur de Laimont," she said eventually and buzzed the gate open. He gave a soft nod, said nothing, and walked past. A few heads turned, a few eyebrows lifted, nothing overt, just that kind of synchronized disapproval reserved for those who didn't read the dress code correctly. He chose the seat furthest from the espresso bar, next to a wide glass wall overlooking the tarmac. Planes glided in and out of view like great silent creatures. He watched them, unmoving, as though measuring something they could never know. From his bag, he pulled out a small, velvet pouch. Inside, a silver harmonica, dulled with time but clearly cared for. He held it with both hands. Behind him, the whispers began. "Is that who I think it is? Can't be. He looks tired. Maybe he's shooting something. A role? He's in the wrong lounge, that's for sure." He didn't flinch, not once. At the bar, Gregory Langston, CEO of a boutique Parisian brand known for its brutal exclusivity, chuckled into his espresso. "This man's been staring at the same plane for 20 minutes, he said to his companion. A sleek young woman with sharp eyeliner and a sharper tongue must be waiting for someone to remind him who he used to be." She laughed. Short, cruel, empty. Keanu blinked slowly. The plane outside had finished refueling. The world continued as if it didn't see the tiny shifts happening just beneath the surface. But one woman noticed. A lounge attendant, no older than 22, paused behind the bar, eyes flickering between her screen and the quiet man in the corner. Her hand hesitated over a cup. She had seen him before, not on a screen, not in a magazine. In a story her grandmother told, a story about music, about war, and about a harmonica played in a place no music should have survived. She didn't say anything. Not yet. The board lit up. Flight 420 to Vienna, delayed by 45 minutes. More time, more judgment, and more truth waiting to arrive. The lounge had grown more crowded. The delay spread like a slow leak, and with it came more tension, more sideways glances, more caffeine, more reason for people to amuse themselves at someone else's expense. Gregory Langston leaned back in his seat, his blazer perfectly creased, shoes so polished they reflected the ceiling lights like mirrors. And as far as he could tell, the man in the corner with the boots, the weathered satchel, the air of having seen too much and said too little, did not. He waited for silence, then struck. "You know," Langston said, loud enough to cut across the lounge, "it's amazing what passes for first class these days." A few people looked up, a few smiled, no one stopped him. "Next thing you know, they'll be letting in buskers from the metro," he continued, swirling the espresso in his tiny porcelain cup. "Or actors from movies no one remembers." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter followed, the kind that clung to politeness like static. His companion giggled, then quickly covered her mouth. Someone in a sharp business suit looked away but didn't speak. Another sipped her champagne slowly, pretending not to listen. Keanu did not move, not a flinch, not a sigh. Instead, he gently placed his harmonica pouch back into the satchel and reached for something else. A folded paper, its edges worn soft. He unfolded it like a priest handling scripture. It was a music score. Handwritten, yellowed, the name at the top read, "Sarajevo Nocturne," Winter, 1995. Beneath the title, a dedication to those who made music where there was only noise. The bartender noticed. So did the young attendant from earlier. Her hand stilled above the register. She knew that name. Her grandmother had whispered it once. A story about a man who had played for the wounded during a siege when everything else was silence and gunfire. Gregory Langston wasn't done. He smirked, standing now, walking with exaggerated leisure toward the windows. He stopped just short of Keanu's seat. "I mean, come on," he said to the room, feigning jest. "You can't just carry around an instrument and expect people to forget you haven't been relevant since dial-up internet." Few laughs, a few guilty smiles. Still no one stopped him. But one woman stood. She was in her 70s, her coat simple, her shoes orthopedic. She held a violin case in her hand like it weighed more than it should. And her voice, when she spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Do you know what that is?" she asked, pointing to the paper in Keanu's hand. "That's the song that kept my brother alive." Langston froze. The laughter died. "I remember it," she said, stepping closer. "I was 12. We had no power, no food, no safety. But every night at the same time, someone played from the old ruins. A harmonica. Just 5 minutes. That's all." Her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed firm. Those 5 minutes reminded us we were still human. Silence slammed into the lounge like a door blown shut. Langston took a step back. His hand twitched at his cufflink. He looked around for an ally, a smirk, a shrug, but found none, only downcast eyes and a gathering storm of shame. Keanu looked up, finally, and met the woman's gaze. She nodded once, like someone who had waited decades to say thank you. And in that quiet, everyone heard the real sound of the room. It was not Langston's voice anymore. It was memory and dignity. Waiting to be heard was almost too quiet. The lounge, once alive with soft arrogance and filtered laughter, had sunk into a thick hush. The kind that made every sound echo too loudly. A spoon-tapping porcelain, the faint hiss of a nearby espresso machine, the breath someone forgot to hold. Gregory Langston adjusted his collar. He had overstepped. Even he could feel it. But pride, like expensive cologne, clings long after its welcome. He didn't apologize. He simply returned to his seat, mask slipping slightly as he reached for his tablet with fingers that trembled, just faintly. A few moments passed. Then 2 security staff entered the lounge. They were young, dressed in black blazers with airport emblems on the breast. Polite, professional, but purposeful. Their eyes swept the room with that alert calm only well-trained guards carried. They didn't ask for Gregory. They walked straight to Keanu. "Excuse us, sir," one said, voice low, almost regretful. "We've had a concern raised, just standard protocol." A concern? The oldest trick. Say nothing outright. Raise concerns. Let the humiliation unfold on its own. Keanu met their gaze evenly. "Of course," he said. He stood, lifting his satchel, the same one Langston had mocked. Its leather was cracked, but lovingly kept, the strap worn smooth from years of use. He followed the officers without complaint, boots soft against the marble floor. And though no one said anything, every eye followed him. They moved through a glass side door into a small inspection room. Sterile, bright, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. A table, 2 chairs, a camera in the corner. Keanu placed the bag on the table. "Please," the younger officer said, gesturing. He nodded. Unzipping the satchel, he began to pull items out one by one. A carefully folded sweater. A copy of letters to a young poet with underlined pages and scribbled notes in the margins. A faded boarding pass from a flight dated 15 years ago. And then the harmonica. The metal caught the light. It was engraved, faint but visible. "Yes," Ryan replied. "Sarajevo Rain." The older officer leaned in, his eyes changed. He recognized the city, the reference, the date. But Keanu wasn't finished. From a side pocket he withdrew a photograph. black and white, corners soft from time. In the picture, a young Keanu, seated on a broken stone wall, harmonica at his lips. Around him, men and women sat cross-legged, their eyes closed, some bandaged, some smiling, a city in ruins behind them. Another item. A sheet of handwritten music, its edges yellowed. And finally, a pressed bunch of white wild daisies, dried and tied with a ribbon. No weapons, no contraband, nothing but memory and care and the weight of time. The room was silent. Keanu didn't look up. He simply began to repack everything, slowly, reverently. "You're not a threat," the younger guard said, almost in a whisper. "I know," Keanu replied. They didn't ask anything else. But in the silence that followed, the meaning hung heavy in the air. Back in the lounge, the atmosphere had turned fragile. People avoided each other's eyes. The older woman with the violin case sat straight-backed, her hands resting protectively over the instrument. The young attendant stared toward the closed inspection room door, guilt blooming across her face. When Keanu returned, he walked like nothing had happened, sat back in the same chair, placed the harmonica on the table beside him, gently. No one said a word, but everyone saw the way his fingers hovered over it, not trembling, not angry, just steady, like a musician waiting for the cue, or a soldier waiting for morning. She hadn't spoken since the comment, not during the security escort, not when the silence settled thick as fog over the lounge. But now, as Keanu gently placed the harmonica on the table beside him once more, its metal gleaming in the low light, the woman with the violin case rose from her seat, slowly, carefully, as though the weight of the past had settled onto her spine and was asking her to stand for it one last time. She was small. Her coat was wool, navy blue with seams faded by time. Her shoes were sensible. Her eyes were not. Her eyes were fire. On her, she walked past champagne flutes and luxury briefcases in curated indifference until she stood just beside Keanu's seat. Everyone watched. Even Langston, who had gone pale. Keanu looked up at her, surprised, but not alarmed. There was something in her presence that felt known. She didn't speak at first. She simply looked down at the harmonica on the table. Her breath caught. Her hand lifted, trembled, but didn't quite touch it. Instead, she spoke. "You always reply that sound," she whispered, and the room froze. It was 1995, Sarajevo. The nights were longer than the days. My father, he used to sit with his back to the cold wall of the shelter. He'd hold my hand, and when the shelling started, he would say, "Wait, wait until the music." A tear slipped down her cheek, but her voice didn't shake. And then, it would come, every night, soft, like smoke. Someone playing the harmonica, just one melody, always the same, gentle, defiant, like it was daring the war to interrupt. She turned, slowly facing the lounge. I don't know how many of us survived because of that sound, but I know that for those who didn't, it was the last beautiful thing they heard. No one moved. Even the espresso machine had stopped humming. The woman turned back to Keanu. Her fingers brushed the edge of the harmonica now, reverent. "I never thought I'd see it again," she said. "Or the man who played it." Keanu gave a small, solemn nod. "I wasn't brave," he said softly. "I was just there." She smiled, and it wasn't a smile of admiration. It was a smile of memory. "No," she said, "you were music, and that was enough." Behind them, the young lounge attendant wiped her eyes discreetly. A man in a three-piece suit cleared his throat, then stared down at his watch without reading it. Someone else turned their phone face down on the table. Even Langston didn't speak. For the first time all morning, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was sacred. A space made not of guilt, but of recognition. The woman gently lifted her violin case and placed it on the table. "I kept this," she said, unlatching it. Inside, tucked beside the polished wood of the instrument, was a folded sheet. She opened it slowly. Kola, a copy of the same handwritten score. Sarajevo Nocturne, Winter 1995. One note, in faded ink, played in the dark so others might still dream. I didn't know your name, she said. None of us did, but we knew the music. Keanu's voice was a whisper. That's all I wanted you to know. The sound of a flight announcement echoed through the terminal, far away, but no one stood, no one checked their phones. They were all still seated in Gate 14's lounge, surrounded not by marble and champagne, but by something else entirely now. By dignity, by memory, by a quiet song they'd never heard, but could somehow feel, as if it had always been playing underneath the noise of everything else. No one returned to their conversations. No clink of glass, no idle laughter. It was as though the lounge itself was holding its breath. Keanu sat motionless, the harmonica once again resting in front of him. The woman with the violin case had stepped back but remained nearby, her hands clasped tightly around the handle. Gregory Langston fidgeted with his collar, adjusting a tie that didn't need adjusting. His companion had crossed her legs the other way and now stared intently at the pattern on the carpet. No one met Keanu's eyes. But then, the sound of small footsteps. Soft, unapologetic. Abel, age 7, walked slowly across the lounge floor. Tousled brown hair, freckles. Sneakers that lit up blue with every step. He held something in his hand, a white napkin crumpled at the edges, and a black felt pen. His mother, flustered, red-faced, called after him in a hushed panic. Thomas, come back here, leave the gentleman alone. But Thomas didn't stop. He walked straight up to Keanu's table and stood still for a moment, blinking up at him. Are you the man from the song? He asked, voice soft but clear. Keanu looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. I don't know, he said. The boy held out the napkin and pen. Can I have your name? No one breathed. Keanu took the napkin carefully, as if it were fragile. He bent slightly, wrote slowly, then handed it back. The boy looked at the signature, then held it against his chest like something priceless. Thank you, he whispered. Then, without thinking, he placed the napkin on the table and instead held out something else. His toy harmonica, cheap plastic, green and gold. Want to trade? The room rippled. No one expected it, not even Keanu. But he leaned forward, eyes twinkling now, and accepted the toy harmonica like it was a sacred object. Deal, he said. He gave the silver harmonica, the one that had sung against gunfire, to the boy. Not because he needed to, but because the boy had asked, without pride, without judgment, with only wonder. And sometimes, that was the only thing that deserved an answer. The boy ran back to his mother, holding the harmonica high. She says it's not clean, he told her, but I don't care. Laughter broke across the room. Not cruel this time, not smug, but real, warm, disarming. People began to shift in their seats, not from discomfort, but from release. Someone stood and walked over to the espresso bar to offer the old woman with the violin a chair. Another passenger asked the young lounge attendant if she had water for Mr. Reeves. Even Gregory Langston, red in the face, silently placed his tablet back in his briefcase. He didn't apologize, but he didn't speak again either. And through it all, Keanu sat quietly, holding the green plastic harmonica, turning it gently in his fingers. He looked toward the window again, but this time the sky seemed brighter. Outside, the tarmac shimmered under afternoon light. The jet to Vienna was now ready. The call would come soon. But no one rushed to board. Something more important had already arrived. The lounge doors slid open with a soft chime. A uniformed gate agent stepped inside, tablet in hand, voice polite but clear. Boarding for Flight 420 to Vienna will now begin. We invite our first-class passengers to proceed. There was no rush, no stampede of designer luggage or impatient clearing of throats. Just a quiet shuffle. Reluctant, almost embarrassed. The kind of stillness that follows an unexpected truth. The gate agent scanned the room and paused. Then she walked toward Keanu. Everyone watched. But this time, it wasn't curiosity that turned their heads. It was respect, or perhaps something older, something people don't often name aloud. She stopped a few feet in front of him. "Mr. Reeves," she said gently, "the captain has asked if you would like to board first." Keanu looked at her for a moment, then stood, the plastic toy harmonica still tucked in his coat pocket. He nodded once. "Thank you," he said simply. He reached for his satchel, zipped it carefully, and slung it over his shoulder. The harmonica, the one the boy had given him, gave a small creak inside the fabric. It was a sound that didn't quite belong in a luxury lounge, and yet, as he passed the rows of silent passengers, no one dared speak. A man in a charcoal suit stepped aside. A woman, the same who had laughed earlier, now lowered her gaze and whispered, "I'm sorry," though the words barely carried. Keanu said nothing. He didn't need to. His steps were steady, not hurried, not proud, just grounded. When he reached the lounge entrance, the violin woman stood once more. She didn't speak. But as he passed, she gently bowed her head. Keanu paused. "I remember," he said softly, "the melody you played, after the harmonica. It was in D minor." Her eyes welled with tears. Every note. And then he was gone. Through the gate, into the corridor, toward the waiting aircraft. The silence in the lounge remained. But it was no longer the awkward silence of superiority. It was the heavy quiet of reflection. A young man by the window slowly removed his earbuds. A woman in her 50s began typing something into her phone, then deleted it. Whatever she had been about to post, it didn't feel right anymore. Gregory Langston sat in his leather chair, unmoving. His wine sat untouched beside him. He looked toward the window, then back to his lap, as if unsure where to rest his gaze. His smirk was gone. What remained on his face was not shame, exactly, but the dawning realization that he had missed something sacred, and that silence would follow him long after the flight. Above the tarmac, the jet's nose tilted slightly toward the golden sky. Its fuselage shimmered. Engines rumbled to life. Slowly, the aircraft began to roll forward. Inside it, Keanu settled by the window. He didn't take out the harmonica. He didn't unfold the music sheet. He just watched the ground slip away beneath him, not as escape, but as witness. The journey wasn't over, but the lesson had already landed. Vienna shimmered under a pale dusk. The city, famous for its symphonies and golden opera halls, now rested in quiet anticipation. But Keanu wasn't heading to Musikverein. He wasn't bound for red carpets or velvet curtains. Instead, his cab turned off the main avenue, weaving through narrow, cobbled lanes, past corner cafes where locals still sipped espresso with newspapers folded under their arms. The car pulled up outside a modest sandstone building. No banners, no grand marquee. St. Agnes Residence for Musicians, St. 1948. Keanu stepped out, harmonica in his pocket, satchel still slung over his shoulder. He paused, looking up at the facade. Ivy had begun to creep along the cracks in the walls. The windows flickered with warm yellow light. He smiled. This was where he was needed. Inside, the hall was nothing like the lounges he had just left behind. The chairs didn't match. The stage was barely raised. The air smelled of lavender and old books. And the people, some in wheelchairs, others with canes, most in simple clothes, sat not as audience, but as family. They were retired cellists, war-era violinists, blind pianists, backup singers from a time when recordings were on tape, once celebrated, now largely forgotten, but not tonight. The staff moved aside as Keanu entered. There were no press releases, no photographers. Only soft applause, the kind that comes not from excitement but from recognition. He walked up to the front, bowed his head slightly, and removed the plastic harmonica from his coat pocket. A chuckle rippled through the room. "Budget cuts?" someone called gently. Keanu grinned. "Trade deal," he said. Then he reached into his satchel and took out the silver harmonica. A gasp, not of shock, but of memory. One man, eyes clouded with age, sat straighter. A woman near the front clutched the armrest of her chair, lips parted, already hearing the notes before they were played. Keanu raised the harmonica. No fanfare, no introduction, just breath and brass. And then, music. Soft, aching, familiar. Sarajevo Nocturne, winter 1995. The room stilled. Not a soul moved. Not a breath was wasted. It was a song played for no audience but the one that remembered how silence once meant danger and music was defiance. The notes floated through the hall like smoke through broken rafters. They curled into the corners, slipped under eyelids, stirred old aches and old loves. Tears fell, but no one sobbed, because it wasn't sorrow, it was release. He finished the final note with a breath so long and steady it left the air trembling, then lowered the harmonica, letting it rest against his chest. No applause came. None was needed. One man, a former conductor from Munich, now confined to a motorized chair, whispered hoarsely, "That was the last thing I heard before the mortar hit. I never knew who played it." Keanu looked at him and said quietly, "You weren't supposed to." A nurse at the back, wiping her eyes, stepped forward with a tissue box. Another helped an old woman sit down after she had tried to stand in gratitude, legs too shaky with emotion. Someone wheeled a piano closer to the front. The woman with trembling hands touched the keys. Another joined with a battered cello. And then the room played. Not for anyone watching, not for fame, but because the music had been remembered. And that meant everything. Keanu stepped back, took a seat in the last row, and listened. Not as a performer, but as someone who had simply carried the song far enough for others to take it again. Back at Charles de Gaulle, the lounge at Gate 14 had emptied. Flight 420 was long gone. So were the passengers, scattered across time zones and destinations, each carrying a silence they didn't expect to bring with them. The cleaning crew moved through slowly, resetting tables, replacing half-drunk glasses with fresh linen, vacuuming the floors without urgency. One attendant, the same young woman who had watched it all, moved toward the corner chair where Keanu had first sat. Something caught her eye. Not trash, not something discarded. Folded precisely, left on the table beside the empty water glass, was a small square of thick paper. Ivory, unbranded. She hesitated, then picked it up. There were only 12 words on it, handwritten in neat, measured script. Dignity doesn't raise its voice. It simply waits to be recognized. No signature, no name, just the message. The kind you don't read once, the kind you carry. She stood still for a long moment, holding the note in both hands. Around her, the lounge buzzed back to life. New passengers drifted in, indifferent, phones out, suits pressed, back to business. But something had changed. The chair remained empty. No one sat there for the rest of the evening. It was as if the space itself remembered. Somewhere over the Atlantic, on a different flight, Gregory Langston stared out his window. His reflection shimmered back at him. Not confident, not polished, just quiet. He pulled a napkin from the seat pocket in front of him and began to write something. He didn't know what it would become, but he started anyway. At the St. Agnes residence, the old musicians slept better than usual. Some dreamed of harmonicas, of dark tunnels filled with song, of notes that rose higher than sirens. And for once, they didn't wake up afraid. In the hallway, just outside the music room, a nurse pinned a copy of the concert program to the bulletin board. Across the top, someone had written in bold ink, "For those who never stopped listening." And in a small apartment in Vienna, Keanu sat by the window, harmonica in hand. Outside, the sky was beginning to snow. He didn't play. Not yet. Instead, he looked at the plastic green toy harmonica resting beside the silver one. Side by side, like memory and hope. And he smiled, because some journeys aren't about where we go, but about what we choose to carry back.